speaks with clarity. This party built the architecture of Jamaica's digital infrastructure. We have we have every right to hold this government to account for what has or has not been done with it. And I did receive a message from the minister, with responsibility minister, the member from Western Portland, that he's unavoidably absent today. He had to do an emergency visit overseas. I was going to depute the leader of government business to take notes, but he's not here now. So I'm going to depute the member from West Kingston to do so. Madam Speaker, I say all of that not to dwell in the past, but to provide an honest baseline against which the present must be measured. And when that measurement is made, the conclusion is uncomfortable. The telecom sector in Jamaica has, for the better part of a decade, been advancing at a pace that is simply not commensurate with the demands of the modern digital economy. Policy ambition in this sector has stalled. The last meaningful reform to be delivered was the implementation of number portability. That was in 2016. What was left on the table in 2016 remains on the table today. The issues identified then as urgent priorities have not been resolved. They have simply been deferred, whilst the world has moved on, and the gap between Jamaica's regulatory framework and the realities of a rapidly evolving global sector has continued to widen. Madam Speaker, allow me to place on the parliamentary record 5 areas of unfinished business that this shadow ministry intends to address fulsomely. Each of these is a commitment not to process, but to purpose and to people. First, the convergence of technology must be met with a convergence of regulation. The boundaries between telecommunications, broadcasting, and internet services have, in practical terms, ceased to exist. Secondly, Jamaica's transition from 4G LTE to 5G infrastructure cannot be allowed to proceed without a clear national strategy. Fifth generation connectivity is not simply faster internet. It is the foundational infrastructure upon which the Internet of Things, telemedicine, precision agriculture, smart cities, and the next generation of Jamaican industry will depend. We need a plan, and we need it now. Third, Madam Speaker, the co-location of telecoms infrastructure must be made a regulatory requirement. Competing providers constructing parallel and duplicated physical infrastructure is wasteful, visibly intrusive, and economically inefficient. Fourth, monopolistic control over access to submarine fiber cable capacity must be directly addressed. And fifth, meaningful competition, which we achieved some time ago, must be reintroduced again in those basic service segments where market concentration continues to work against the interests of ordinary Jamaica. So, Madam Speaker, the 5 structural issues I have just outlined are matters of regulatory policy. But I wish to speak to the lived experience of Jamaican consumers, because it is that lived experience which ultimately justifies the urgency of the reforms. The quality of our telecom services in Jamaica is by any objective measure below the standards that consumers are paying for and below the standard. Madam Speaker, I'm tired to be on my phone, losing the calls, seeing appearing on my screen, missed calls, and the phone didn't ring. Madam Speaker, I don't want to beat up too much on the providers, but the service is poor and we need an improvement in the service. And I have to call upon the Office of Utilities Regulation, because they have the obligation to enforce service quality standards with rigor and transparency. This Parliament has an obligation to hold it accountable for doing so. I intend to exercise that obligation fully. Madam Speaker, even as we press for a more resilient telecoms infrastructure, we must register our concern regarding a recent government initiative. On February 2nd, the government announced that it is engaging Trans-America's Fiber System Limited to design, build, and operate a subsea cable branching unit into Jamaica, together with an associated cable land station at a cost of $50 million US. Let me remind this House that when we liberalized the telecoms industry in 2000, we achieved competition in relation to fiber access by awarding licenses to two companies, one of which, FiberLink, deployed service. At that time, Madam Speaker, I ensured that the government would have adequate access to fiber network by earmarking such provision within the license granting. That facility remains available to the government to this day. Unfortunately, the second company subsequently merged with Cable and Wireless, and we no longer have competition in that segment of the market. Prices are now very high, and we would welcome a return to a fully competitive environment. We would. We are, however, concerned about the role that the government intends to play going forward. Madam Speaker, we again call for full transparency. Nothing has been said publicly since the announcement in January, and this Parliament, I think, deserves an update. First, what is the total cost of the facility and how it will be financed? Second, has a written agreement been concluded with Trans-America's Fiber System Limited, and will that be shared with the Jamaican people? Third, on what basis and by what process will access to the facility be determined? Fourth, what is the defined and bounded role of the government in the operation and governance of this facility? Madam Speaker, we support the addition of greater bandwidth capacity for the country. However, we question the extent of government involvement, particularly given that, as I have noted already, we made adequate provision for the government with the award of the first license. So we await the answers from the government. I also want to say briefly, Madam Speaker, some 4 years ago, the minister had announced that there was another licensee granted license to get involved in cellular service. We haven't heard anything since that time. We want to see greater competition. We welcome competition. And we want to see that player on board. Madam Speaker, I want to speak briefly about the recent decommissioning of the 2G network. That has been completed, and the eventual decommissioning of the 3G network is a matter of when, not whether. I don't think sufficient plan, sufficient education had taken place as we removed that 2G network. Many of those persons with bangers were shocked that overnight they did not have service. So, and they still can't recover. So, Madam Speaker, a thorough assessment of the industries were affected, applications and public services that remain dependent upon 3G as we move to 3G abandonment. That is going to be urgently required so that the transition can be managed in an orderly, planned, and non-disruptive manner. As I proceed, Madam Speaker, because energy is the real high point, I believe, of the presentation, I just want to say one other word about telecoms. The Telecommunications Act. We passed modern legislation then in 2000. It's over 2 decades now. I think it is sufficient time for the government to revisit that law, to modernize the law, because the legislation is in urgent need of a comprehensive review. The nature of emerging technologies and the evolution in the way that established terminologies are applied means that the language of the Act requires updating to reflect current realities. And more fundamentally, the regulatory structure established by the Act must be modernized to take account of the convergence of technologies that I have already described. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to the Universal Service Fund. As I mentioned earlier, the fund celebrates 21 years of service, and I have acknowledged them, but I want to say a special word of thanks to the staff of the Universal Service Fund. And in particular, their deployment, their commitment to deploying the free Wi-Fi facilities across communities, often in challenging circumstances and with evident, or certainly with evident enthusiasm. They represent the original mandate of this institution at its best. They have made a genuine and substantial contribution to enabling Jamaicans to access the internet. However, we have not yet achieved the goal of universal broadband connectivity across the island. The mission was to ensure that every single Jamaican in every community has ready access to high-speed broadband connectivity. That mission remains incomplete. And from as early as 2015, the Human Rights Council of the UN had declared that access to the internet is a basic human right. In today's society, the internet is a necessary component of the exercise of the right to freedom of expression, and its use promotes progress for society as a whole. My concern centers on the resources that were provided in this year's budget for the Universal Service Fund. I'm aware that they had asked for $1.4 billion to continue the work that they are doing to ensure that all communities in Jamaica had free Wi-Fi. They only received 400 million of the 1.4 billion asked. And I think that is wrong. And I want to commend to the Ministry of Finance that they look again at the allocation for the USF, because everybody inside here knows that those Wi-Fi facilities that have been established in communities, they cost a lot of money, but many of them don't work after a few weeks because there's no money to maintain them. There's no money to pay the bills. And it really is a shame, because you have these elaborate ceremonies where the communities celebrate the establishment of these free Wi-Fi, and after a short while, the system is down. We have to get the USF greater support in this is their 21st year. Madam Speaker, again, I remind people, tomorrow you'll get a full presentation online. I wish JIS would cover it.
Don't hold your breath.
The importance of energy to the growth of our economy is not a new argument. And I fully am aware that this House has heard it from me before. I make no apology for returning to it, because the problem has not been resolved, and the consequences for the Jamaican people grow more severe with each passing year. Right. The high cost of energy continues to impose a heavy burden upon our country. It bears down on every household struggling to make ends meet, on every commuter trying to get to work, and on every business fighting to remain viable. Until this issue is addressed with decisiveness and a genuine political will, sustainable economic growth will remain out of reach. On the matter of electricity pricing, the minister would have the country believe that the high price of electricity is attributable solely to the terms of the JPS license. It is necessary, Madam Speaker, to address that claim frontally today. The JPS license came into being in 2001. Over its life, it has been amended by the Jamaican Labour Party government, by the PNP government. Substantial amendments have occurred. Whenever it was necessary that changes were needed in the national interest. It is due to expire in July 2027. There is no legal impediment, Madam Speaker, that should prevent this government from initiating early negotiations and seeking a new license even before that expiry date. The truth, Madam Speaker, is that the failure to act has been a matter of political choice, not legal constraint. And it has sent the entire industry, JPS and all others, in a state of uncertainty that this country cannot afford. Just gonna write it. Let me remind this House of the record. Madam Speaker, I remind the House. The price of electricity in 2016, under the very same license, was 26 US cents per kilowatt hour. Today, the price is in excess of 40 US cents per kilowatt hour. That increase has occurred under this government's watch.
Derelict.
Madam Speaker, I mentioned before that there were changes to the JPSCO license in 2016. The amendments of that license that took effect fundamentally restructured Jamaica's energy mix. So we did do fundamental change to the license in 2016. At that time, approximately 95% of electricity was being generated from heavy fuel oil and diesel, with only 5% due to renewables. As a direct result of the changes to that license, Jamaica's energy mix today stands at approximately 60% LNG, 25% heavy fuel oil, and 15% renewables. A complete revolution took place because we dared to change the license in 2016. That restructuring produced a significant reduction in electricity prices. It was deliberate policy, not accident. Let me remind this House. And it wasn't easy, because when we first went to JPS to talk about bringing more renewables online, on the grid, they said if you put more than 5%, it's going to lead to instability. We're going to have shutdown and blackouts. And today we're at 15%. We need to get to 50%. Since that time, not a single new renewable source has been added. In 2013, we brought on 120 megawatts. Nothing has been added since that time. We also, in 2016, brought on net billing, where we allowed persons who were generating their own electricity through solar, doing more than they needed at home, to sell the excess to the grid. That was net billing. We gave 700 licenses during that period. What has happened since 2016? But, Madam Speaker, as I speak about the JPSCO license, I think it is appropriate because in 2024, when we were hit by Hurricane Beryl, we did criticize the JPSCO harshly for the slow response. I want to put on record our appreciation for the JPSCO's response to Hurricane Melissa. And even though they are not 100% as yet, I think the effort has been valiant. We want the people, though, of Westmoreland to get electricity back as soon as possible. As soon as possible. And St. Elizabeth. But, Madam Speaker, let me go back to the license issue. Because today, I intend to show to this Parliament that the Minister need not start any negotiations for a new license. He need not import new advisors to advise him on the terms of a new license. From 2 years ago, we have been providing this Parliament the terms of that new license. Today, I'm going to give you the new license that the Minister should. So firstly, Madam Speaker, this is not new. We were able to do a new license for cable and wireless in 2001. All right. So what are the features? What are the features of this new license? One, the right of first refusal currently enjoyed by JPS for the replacement of its existing generation capacity must be removed. Any new generation license must be procured through the government-owned GPE entity by way of an internationally competitive tender, with awards based on least cost of available renewable technology, supported by the most efficient storage solution. You can't award licenses for renewables without thinking about storage. And the level of efficiency in storage has improved tremendously. I'm telling you what the new license must be. Madam Speaker, secondly, wheeling must be implemented immediately under the new license. This is a facility that permits a large commercial. You know, the license was written in 2016. These are provisions in that 2016 license. Only if we were there to implement them. Only if we were there to implement them. So wheeling is a facility that permits a large commercial or industrial enterprise to generate electricity at one location and to transport it across the national grid to its other locations, subject to a reasonable transmission fee. Time comes for that to be implemented. Madam Speaker, we have said so repeatedly that owners and tenants of special economic zone facilities must be permitted to generate their own electricity and to distribute it within the zone. This will reduce operational costs, improve competitiveness, and attract investment. The member from Western St. Andrew has been pleading that case. Both homeowners and businesses must be enabled to sell surplus electricity generated from rooftop solar installations to the national grid. The pricing structure for electricity sold through net metering licenses must be genuinely incentivized through an appropriate feed-in tariff mechanism. The distribution of electricity must be liberalized to accommodate microgrids. Microgrid licenses are to be awarded on a competitive basis with a specific mandate to provide service to unserved and underserved communities. Access, every community must be served even where a subsidy is required to make that provision economically viable. This is what it means to build with purpose and to build with people. And very importantly, Madam Speaker, because this constitutes 20% of the cost of electricity that all of us pay, there must be a clear and enforceable mandate for the reduction and elimination of illegal connections and unmetered electricity usage. The government must accept a substantially greater responsibility for addressing this practice that has before now been the case. Penalties for such occurrences in wealthy communities, because many people believe that theft only occurs in poor communities. I think we need to increase the penalties where people steal electricity in these wealthy communities and provide a mechanism for the poorer communities to get attached to the grid. Lawfully. The function of dispatch, which is that body that determines which generation you put on the grid, which is now done by the JPS, must be changed to a fully transparent system set up by the Office of Utilities Regulation. The separation of JPS accounts and operational functions, which again were mandated before, they must be implemented without further delay. Generation, transmission, and distribution must be clearly and accountably separated. And we have one of the most opaque billing systems in the world. We need to open that to greater transparency. All charges must be disaggregated, including generation, transmission, distribution, and all categories of system losses. We need to make the consumer more enabled to see exactly what the usages are. Then, Madam Speaker, we have a whole raft of consumer protection standards, which must be comprehensively updated. Among them is the need to ensure that there are penalties that are associated for breaches of these standards. There are so many times when, because of fluctuation in voltages, your equipment at home, your appliances get damages And when you turn to the JPSCO for compensation, they say, did you read the fine print of your contract? We have to change that to give consumer better protection. We have to also, Madam Speaker, move to the completion of the transition to LED street lighting. It must be mandated that the provision of the 2016 provisions must be enforced without further delay. We have quite a few recommendations for the new license. And you'll watch my thing tomorrow, very well. Because I have to say something about Petrojam, and finally, in the additional 10 minutes that I have, to say something about oil and gas exploration, because the minister has been talking of a storm about oil and gas exploration, not giving credit, and also not being forceful in trying to find oil and gas. So, Madam Speaker, Petrojam has been asked to carry water in a basket. In its current condition, the company will continue to record substantial losses year over year. This year, it was revealed in the Standing Finance Committee.
Caldwell, I note you only have 1 minute left. You know you are not the opener of the debate. So,
He said both.
no, he didn't. And it is not both. The opener of the debate is the minister who opens the debate. Anyways, Ms. Brandon, could you please give him the speech?
We all heard it. He said the speech.
Welcome back.
He's an honorable man.
No, so, but, Madam Speaker, I did in my reference would suggest that both persons who speak today would get the 10 minutes. But I do take your point that there is only one opener and closer of the debate. With that said, because we only, though we had started the discussion with the leader of opposition business, we only finalized after I spoke to you today. I would ask only on this occasion, in his position as just getting the time.
House Leader, the member spent time during his debate to argue about following the standing orders. And as the leader of opposition business, he is very clear that the opener and closer of the debate is the minister. From the government side who is assigned the duty of opening the debate. I am very clear as to who the opener of the debate is. And in respect of my request, and you may pull Hansard, I ask for time to be given to the opener and closer of the debate, separate and apart from 5 minutes being granted to the opposition spokesperson. I was very clear on what I asked for in the motion. Thank you very much, House Leader. The member has 1 minute to conclude.
No. Madam Speaker, I rise to protest that ruling very strongly. This Parliament though you are the chair, the arena is right here. And if the leader of government business and opposition business agree on a certain process, that is how it should go. You should not join the arena, Madam Speaker. I still am hoping that my colleague, who and I entered into this agreement,
Don't give up. If I take it, if you don't go no further, we'll give it one.
House Leader,
Madam Speaker, in the spirit of the start of the debates and based on
and House Leader, I would also want you to incorporate based on the discussion or exactly what was agreed by the Speaker.
yeah, so Madam Speaker, as I indicated, when we had discussed the matter prior to which you rightfully indicated as according to Hansard, the discussion was in relation to the opener and closer of the debate. However, in my discussions with Member Paulwell, because we had not signed off on the time frame until we got to the House and seen that he would have prepared prior to, I thought it was only fitting to communicate that he would get some additional time. So I do understand the confusion. What I say is, in the circumstances, we allow the member an additional 5 minutes, along with the 5 minutes that he got, to complete his presentation.
Ms. Brandon, please add 5 minutes to the time on the clock. Leader of Opposition Business, you have 6 minutes to complete.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to colleagues. And I remind you to watch the live tomorrow where I get the full chapter and verse. I was saying, Madam Speaker, that the government has given Petrojam basket to carry water. And I want to say to the minister, as he revealed recently, that there is this price cap on the pricing mechanism at Petrojam, that we have to be very careful, because Petrojam has lost $4 million in the year 2020, $4 billion in the year ending 2025, another $4 billion in the year ending March 2026, and they're likely to lose a lot more. And rather than tampering with the pricing mechanism, I think you can provide consumers with some benefits, because the government is making a windfall in the taxes now being generated by fuel. So I want to say that, and I want to remind the government, there is something called a hedge tax, that was established to provide money to buy insurance and also to do the reforms that are necessary to transition from the heavy usage of heavy fuel oil and diesel. Nothing has happened since 2016. But Madam Speaker, I'm going to go to the oil and gas section, because I think Jamaicans are very confused about the situation as it obtains to the search for oil. My conviction regarding the hydrocarbon potential of Jamaica's territorial waters was formed in a single defining meeting when I sat with the late Dr. Raymond Wright and spent several hours reviewing 3 decades of PCJ's data I became firmly convinced that Jamaica sits atop
God.
a significant hydrocarbon system.
Sing.
It is true that wells had previously been drilled without yielding commercial quantities,
Kim up,
but in 10 of those wells, we had oil shows. And what I mean by that is that we did find oil, but not in commercial quantities. So there's no question that the data points to oil being around in Jamaica, that there's evidence to suggest that there is oil. With the advances in deep sea exploration technology that have occurred in recent decades, I believe then and believe now that the search must continue. However, the government of Jamaica at the time could not fund the work that was necessary, especially because we were constrained by the IMF agreement. I therefore did at the time what was responsible. I took Jamaica's geological data, our technical case, and our ambition on a roadshow from Dallas to Dublin, seeking credible international partners. After all that effort, a single serious player emerged, Tullow Oil, which has since become United Oil and Gas. So that effort, you have heard about United Oil and Gas, that license was signed by me. My time. A 5-year agreement was signed in 2015. The commitment was explicit. The completion of 3D seismic data collection, followed by drilling no later than 2020. That's in the agreement that they were supposed to have drilled for oil by 2020. And even as we signed the agreement, then we were busy negotiating with another significant player, Repsol. All of that fell through after 2016. So I'm very disappointed, Madam Speaker. In place of results, this country has been subject to periodic, titivating and tantalizing revelations by press releases and conferences, all geared to excite and to PR a project that should have reached much further now. We could remain in this holding position for many years. And all I want to say, Madam Speaker, we need to get on with it. There is enough credible data that has been generated. When you look at the structures on the sea, they point to a major hydrocarbon system. But it is known that in places you lose your oil. It drifts, it leaks out. And the longer we wait, is the worse it will be. I have 30 seconds. So, Madam Speaker, everything I've placed before this Parliament today, from the modernization of our telecommunication framework, the restriction of from the revival of Petrotam. We do not build for meaningless statistics or for press releases. We build for the Jamaican people. We build with purpose and we build with people. That is the commitment of this opposition. And it is the commitment we will bring to government. God bless Jamaica.
Slido.
Madam Speaker, we thank the opposition. We thank the opposition spokesperson on energy and telecommunications for his spirited presentation. And I leave it at that. Madam Speaker, today, Madam Speaker, I will now suspend our sectorial debates until next week, at which point we are scheduled to hear from the Minister of Water, Environment and Climate Change, and also from opposition spokespersons on Northwest St. Catherine on on education. Opposition spokesperson on education next week. Madam Speaker, today we will resume the debate on the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Act 2026. We ask members who have not yet spoken, this is now their opportunity to contribute to that debate.
First is the leader of the opposition, the member will commence. Turn your mic on, and orderlies, can you take the podium?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to make my contribution in the debate on the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill 2026 that was tabled by the Prime Minister. The original bill was tabled during his budget debate presentation that was withdrawn last week, Tuesday. A new bill was tabled and he opened the debate last week, Tuesday, on the new bill. Madam Speaker, the opposition recognizes the need for special efforts to contribute to the reconstruction of Jamaica, especially after the terrible damage inflicted on our country by Hurricane Melissa. We are painfully aware that Jamaicans continue to suffer from inadequate shelter, damaged housing. Small businesses and other businesses have had similar losses to their businesses and their working capital, their stock. And we are distressed that more has not been done to bring some kind of help and support to those who need it. We are aware that the ROOS program has been ruled out, funded out of the budget of 25-26, the $10 billion allocation. However, it is inadequate both in its scope because it does not reach and will not reach many who need that help, and in its depth because those who do get help will get inadequate support from the limits that apply to it, and also the deficiencies in the administrative arrangements which have made it very challenging for persons who have sought to access the benefits. But NARA is not about providing solutions to the present needs of those people who are suffering. NARA is really a revamped attempt to inject higher levels of growth into the economy of Jamaica. That is primarily what it is about. If you actually look at the bill, other than the preamble, which does not become a permanent part of the legislation, there is no reference in the bill to Melissa or to any hurricane. And if you look at its provisions, it is really about the government trying to find a way of achieving meaningful rates of economic growth after a decade of failure to do so. Jamaica has been categorized by low levels, very low levels of real economic growth over the past decade. And despite promises like 5 and 4, which were spectacular failures, where 5% real GDP growth was to be achieved after 4 years, nothing like that was achieved. We've had periods of negative economic growth because of shocks to the economy and so on, but there's been no structural shift in the design of our economy that would enable our economy to deliver high levels of growth. We're also mindful of the role that the bureaucracy plays in delaying projects and the frustrations that come with that. And NARA is an attempt to address that issue in a particular way. So I understand the underlying philosophy that has given rise to NARA and the desire to provide a legislative solution to the lethargic rates of economic growth that have been bedeviling Jamaica's economic development, and also the bureaucratic entanglements that the government has found it difficult to find ways to navigate through efficiently. However, given the role that NARA will play as the major construct for the allocation of substantial resources to public projects, and also as an adjunct to that, its role in facilitating private sector investments as well, especially given how broadly that is now being framed, because originally the projects that we had anticipated being included in these arrangements were projects of 150 million US and up. And when the bill came last week, the Prime Minister had changed his tune on that and reduced that by to a tenth of the original figure, to 15 million US, which means that a vast array of projects are going to be potentially eligible for inclusion under the NARA regime. And this means that the governance arrangements are absolutely critical going forward for the people of Jamaica and for investors and for our international partners to have confidence in this new construct called NARA. The governance arrangements, the transparency of its operations, the accountability of the persons who are reposed with responsibility for executing its functions, all of these are vital. And this is where the bill falls well and seriously short of what is required. The fact of the matter is that NARA is a statutory body without a statutory board. It is an aberration insofar as it is creating a legal entity with the powers that a legal entity have without the governance arrangements that are normal and necessary to ensure proper governance of the body itself. And I will speak to that in greater detail as I go through the bill. Madam Speaker, I propose to approach this today really as an almost clause by clause analysis, because I think that is the easiest way for me to get through the points that I want to raise. I notice in the definition clause, which is clause 2, the definition of public body excludes executive agencies, which means that the provisions in NARA that relate to approving entities and the powers that would apply under NARA in relation to approving entities will not apply to bodies such as NEPA or PICA, the National Land Agency, National Works Agency. I'm not sure why that decision was made, because those bodies, and there are many others, are significant, but that is the effect of the way in which approving entity has been defined and public body has been defined when you look at those two definitions in tandem. The list of things that an approving entity is responsible for, which is in the definition there, said it includes functions related to a number of things: physical planning, roads, highways, etc. I raise the question because the word including is used, before the list of functions is set out, I wanted to know whether this would include other things that are not in this list, such as permits and licenses that may be needed by the designated strategic investment projects, which are the private sector projects, such as licenses to operate a casino or gaming facility, hotel or resort licenses, wharfish licenses, sufferance wharf licenses to establish private ports, petroleum facilities or energy facilities, and so on. These things, I'm not sure whether or not it's intended that the definition of approving entity would extend to those types of regulated functions, because the language used in the definition says that the list that's provided there is not a exhaustive list. It is just a list of things that happen to be included. And I think that's very important and needs to be clarified. In the definition of goods in section 2, clause 2 of the bill, it speaks to goods means things of every kind and description, whether tangible or intangible. That's a very peculiar definition, Madam Speaker. Intangibles are the antithesis of goods. And to say that goods extends to intangibles is very peculiar, and I think that needs to be reconsidered. I note that in section 4, there are lots of references to projects. And again, because the bill isn't consistent in its language, it isn't clear to me whether the projects referred to in section 4, which are the projects that the authority is responsible for dealing with, are limited to approved reconstruction and resilience projects, which are so defined in section 17, or can NARA pursue other projects that are not on the Cabinet's official list of projects? I think that if there was consistency in the language, it would be clear whether NARA is limited to these approved projects that are on the section 17 cabinet list, cabinet approved list, and the private sector projects which are designated under another provision, or whether other projects may also be pursued by NARA. I think that needs to be made clear. Madam Speaker, in the subsection 2 of clause 2, there is a provision that allows the minister by order to alter a definition of works. And that order is not subject to affirmative resolution. I think it is wrong that a minister can effectively alter a statute passed by Parliament through the House and the Senate without coming back to Parliament for approval of that amendment. And I think subsection 2 of clause 2 ought to be subject to affirmative resolution. Madam Speaker, when you look at clause 3 of the bill, which is the one that establishes it as a statutory body to which section 28 of the Interpretation Act applies, it's not an executive agency, it's a statutory body. It can sue, be sued in its own name, it can own property and so on. That's what the Interpretation Act allows. There are no objects or purposes stated in the law, in this bill, in relation to what NARA is about. And if you look at section 25, 1B2 of the Act, it says that the Cabinet may designate a project as a strategic investment project if the project contributes to the achievement of the purposes of this Act. But there's nowhere in the Act which clearly sets out what the purposes of the Act are. And I think there should be. If you look in the memorandum on objects and reasons which will not, strictly speaking, part of the legislation, but is there to guide parliamentarians and others as to what is intended. There are set out in A, B, C, and D of the memorandum on objects and reasons some basic purposes for which this legislation is being passed. And I think that those ought to be incorporated without this specific references to a particular disaster, but those ought to be incorporated in the bill, perhaps in Section 3, so that Section 3 would not only just establish the authority, but would also set out the purposes and objects for which it is being established. I think that is a major omission from the bill.
Right.
There's a reference in 3.2 to the schedule, which they say shall have effect as the constitution and procedure of the authority. And when you look at it, that's quite a normal way of our legislation dealing with statutory bodies. The schedule was set out, basically what would be the equivalent of the articles of a company as to how it should function procedurally. But all that is addressed in the schedule to this bill relates to the CEO of the authority, nothing else. So it really doesn't, the schedule does not have effect as to the constitution and procedure of the authority. It really only governs the CEO. And that is extraordinary. There's no provision, as I've said, for any board of the authority, for any audit committee, for an internal auditor, for any risk management functions, anything of that nature. And this is an entity that is going to be responsible for administering and managing the expenditure of billions and billions of US dollars worth, if we're to understand, both from the public sector side, but also to facilitate private sector investors as well through speeded up, expedited procedures. This cannot be right. And when I spoke last week, I said this bill ought to go to a joint select committee. And it should. Even if you require that joint select committee to complete its deliberations within a finite period of time, perhaps a month, because of the urgency of this, it needs to have the benefit of interventions and contributions from stakeholders, from the wider society, and have a strong interest in this. Madam Speaker, I noticed in clause 4, which sets out functions of the authority, it doesn't make any reference to designated strategic investment projects. Now, that's strange because the authority does have a role to play in relation to designated strategic investment projects, which are the private sector projects. But in the functions of the authority set out in clause 4, there's no reference to them. And that is odd. And there are numerous references, as I said earlier, to the word projects, but there's no definition of the word projects in the bill. There are references later on to these approved reconstruction resilience projects, and there's references to designated strategic investment projects, but they're in clause 4, they're just references to projects, and you don't know what the scope of that is, and it's not clear what is intended. Madam Speaker, I know that there's no provision providing for any exemption for duties and GCT on materials imported by NARA for these projects. I don't normally, one would expect to see something of that nature in a body that's being established as a public body to undertake works of this nature. There's no provision for that. It isn't even clear to me whether NARA is intended to implement projects as such. In the previous version of the bill, the first version, it specifically stated that, where am I? It specifically stated that NARA would implement projects, but in the bill that's before us now, it isn't that clear. It talks about that they shall procure goods, works, and services for the implementation of projects, programs, and plans, but it doesn't specifically say that NARA is the implementation agency for these projects and on the public sector side. And I think that needs to be added. We also need provisions that speak to, in the functions, speak to prudence, efficiency, and transparency in expending public resources. That should be there. There should be reference to those things. Value for money in procurement. That should be mentioned. Risk management functions. That should be mentioned. Fairness in the procurement and hiring practices. That's a particular matter of concern to the opposition. We would like to see a principle embodied in the legislation of non-discrimination for political affiliation or other characteristics like religion, ethnicity, and so on. That is missing as well. There needs to be in this because of the level of resources that will be expended by this. Subsection 3 of Section 4 says that for the purpose of performing its functions under the Act, the authority may, subject to any regulations that may be made, do anything and enter into any transaction which, in the opinion of the authority, is necessary to ensure the performance of its functions. Anything. And that effectively means that the CEO can unilaterally decide the scope and boundaries of its activities, because the CEO is the only required employee. There will be other employees, but the CEO is the only person who has real authority under this legislation within the construct of NARA itself. And it says that he, before she, can do anything and enter into any transaction which, in the opinion of the authority, which means his or her opinion, is necessary to ensure the performance. Madam Speaker, I turn to Clause 5, which deals with the appointment of the Chief Executive Officer. The law is not clear as to who the Chief Executive Officer reports to. There is a reporting section where the minister can require reports, but that's a different thing from a management perspective and a governance perspective. Who does the CEO report to? It's not clear. How is the CEO's deliverables decided? What are the key performance indicators applicable to the authority and to the CEO's functions? Nothing at all on this. It says that in Section 10 that NARA reports to the Prime Minister, but there's nothing about the CEO's reporting responsibility. And that is a big issue. Madam Speaker, Clause 6 of the bill says that the authority and the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO, can, with the minister's approval, delegate to any person the performance of such of their functions other than the power of delegation, as they may from time to time consider necessary. Now, this power of delegation is significant because any functions can be delegated. The question is, what transparency will arise in relation to delegated functions? You know, important functions could end up being delegated to third parties on terms which are not disclosed, as costs that we are not aware of. There should be a report on all delegated functions by the CEO, and that report should be sent to Parliament on a timely basis. Transparency demands that. Clause 7 talks about the minister's ability to appoint committees to examine and report to the minister on any matter arising out of or connected with the authority's powers and duties. But there is no provision in the bill in relation to this committee that the Prime Minister spoke to, called JAMROC, which he says is the equivalent of EPOC. Now, EPOC had no responsibilities for oversight of any operating entity that is expending zillions of dollars. That is what NARA is going to be doing. A large number. A large number. EPOC's responsibility was to get data from the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Jamaica on Jamaica's economic performance and report to the public on how Jamaica was faring in complying with its commitments under the IMF agreement. So it was a reporting function based on data that was made available to it as to whether Jamaica was on track. This is a totally different function. There's no comparison. This is like a massive conglomerate being operated by a single officer, a CEO with no board and no proper oversight. It's wrong. This bill ought to establish a board along the lines that Jamrock is intended to follow, and that board should be the board to which the CEO reports. And there should be proper governance provisions in the schedule as to how that board operates, and clear lines of oversight and accountability. Jamrock has no legal powers and is not a legal construct. It cannot effectively provide oversight or ensure accountability within NARA. It has no legal authority and it doesn't exist in law. And to suggest otherwise is very misleading to the public. I turn to clause 8 of the bill, and it deals with the funding of the authority. And it says the funds of the authority shall consist of such monies as may from time to time be placed at its disposition for the purpose of this act by Parliament. I assume, and I'd like it to be clarified, that what that is saying then is that NARA's resources from public resources would have to come through an appropriation act. It would have to be included in the budget of the country or in a supplementary budget. And I was wondering about the various disaster risk financing arrangements that the government has put in place. There are two statutory funds. There's a disaster fund and a national disaster fund. There are the insurance arrangements with CRIF. There are the catastrophe bonds which have been entered into and so on. And I was wondering what is the mechanism by which those resources would be made available to NARA? Is it intended to be automatic that they are the ones who expend those resources, or will it be on an ad hoc basis? I think it would be useful to have a clearer understanding of that. I turn to clause 10, and it says that the authority shall furnish a minister with such reports, returns, accounts, and other information as the minister may require. Now, supposing the minister doesn't require any reporting, or doesn't require any formal reporting, written reports, this cannot be the reporting obligation to put it on this discretionary basis. The CEO should be required to prepare semi-annual reports, which the minister should table in Parliament, and the CEO should be required by law to attend Parliament twice a year, like the Bank of Jamaica's governor is now under the Bank of Jamaica Act, to answer questions in relation to those reports. That's what transparency demands. Clause 11, which deals with reporting, speaks to annual and other reports shall be prepared by the authority. And it says a copy of the annual reports and audit financial statements should be submitted within 4 months of the financial year to the minister, and then the minister shall, within a reasonable time. Why a reasonable time? Why not a specific time? Why not within 45 days or 30 days? Cause those to be tabled in Parliament. There should be, as I said, semi-annual interim reports to update the nation on the progress through Parliament of the challenges being faced, how those challenges are being addressed. There's a complete absence of proper oversight for this body. Clause 12 speaks to the need to submit to the approval of the minister by the September 30th of each year a corporate plan, an operating plan, and its estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year. I assume it means the next financial year. I was wondering whether this is subject to the Ministry of Finance's role in finalizing budgets in the normal way that there's a budget call and the statutory bodies, ministries, etc., well, central government bodies submit their proposals for funding, and then the Ministry of Finance essentially scours all of that and the resources that are available and decides what is actually affordable. Is that process going to apply to NARA or not? It's not clear to me from the wording of clause 12 whether that will happen. I move to clause 13 of the bill, and it says the minister may give directions to the authority. We are accustomed to seeing laws which say that the minister can give directions as to general policy to a public body within the minister's portfolio. This is not like that. These are operating directions. The directions under subsection 1 shall be such as the minister appears desirable in the interest of effective performance by the authority of its functions, and to ensure, well, I'm not sure if it's and or because that's not stated, to ensure that approved reconstruction and resilience projects and designated strategic investment projects are implemented in accordance with the terms of Cabinet's approval and the public interest. So the minister has a direct, intrusive role in the operation of NARA. And there's nothing to require directions to be in writing, to be gazetted, so that the public is aware of them. Again, all of these directions that the minister is giving in this body, this critical body, there should be transparency around those directions. There should be a report on all semi-annually to Parliament on what directions have been given by the minister to this body, so that the public knows what is going on. Yeah, I need some more.
Time has expired. Next speaker. You don't get extension. You don't get extension. We'll allow the leader of the opposition 10 minutes, and members, for the other members, you will have to operate within the designated time period. Also, the process of turning on your mics before your knowledge means you will have to turn them off so that we can allow the leader of opposition the additional time. And I'm not sure who would have been in the lineup. Opposition leader?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Leader, hold on. Let me ask House Leader to just move the motion to allow the extra time.
Turn off.
Madam Speaker, we ask that the leader of the opposition be given an additional 10 minutes to complete his presentation.
Members, the question is that the leader of the opposition in the debate be allowed an additional 10 minutes. Opposition leader, 10 to 15 minutes at most. Those in favor, those against, the ayes have it.
Speaker, I don't think we should be parsimonious in allocating time to the leader of the opposition in his presentation on this bill.
Leader of opposition,
Anyway,
with all due respect, all of us are required to follow the rules, including you.
No, there's a discretion in these matters.
And you got a discretion.
Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, it also says that directions under subsection 1 may require the authority to take or refrain from taking certain actions, or to refrain from adopting or pursuing a particular course of action. The minister is in a position to directly interfere in how this statutory body is performing its functions. It's the CEO is there, but the minister is the one who can really direct how it works. And that is not how we normally. And these directions are not required to be in any way disclosed. They're not even required to be in writing. but there should be proper transparency and disclosure around these directions by the minister. Madam Speaker, I was going to say some things in relation to clause 14, which deals with secrecy. I'm going to not use my time for that because I'm aware that one of my colleagues intends to speak on that issue. I move, and also the provisions on indemnification. I would only say that the way this is the wording of the clause 15 on indemnification is that if the CEO or any other employee is charged for a criminal offense, even if that person is convicted, they can be indemnified if it's deemed that they acted honestly and in good faith, and that taxpayers have to pay the legal fees of that convicted criminal. That is bizarre, to say the least. But it's bizarre, to say the least. Madam Speaker, clause 17 talks about approved projects. And it says that the authority shall develop programs and detailed plans, including project scope, delivery arrangements, and timelines. But why does that not make reference to project budgets, to funding arrangements, and to the contractors and professionals that are to be engaged in these projects? Why are those things not included in the programs and detailed plans? That doesn't make sense to me. And it isn't clear as well exactly what NARA's role is in relation to the designated strategic investment projects, which are not referenced here at all. One thing that I noticed is that clause 18 says that programs for reconstruction and resilience shall be developed by the authority, shall state the goods, works, and services necessary, and then it goes on to say, identify all relevant persons involved in and their respective roles in the delivery of the program. And that all has to be submitted to cabinet. And I'm just saying that this disclosure of all relevant persons, from our point of view, it sounds like it's a mechanism for ensuring that persons who are affiliated or perceived as not being on the side of the government can be weeded out of any of these projects. And, you know, to my mind, it is just a carte blanche for political victimization. And that is why it's important that the functions clause has those principles of non-victimization embodied in it. Clause 19 deals with plans, but it speaks to that the authority must update plans periodically, and after any material change in a plan, the authority shall review and update plans periodically, and after any material change of which the authority has noticed and that is likely to adversely affect or delay the implementation of the plan. That is dealt with there, but my question in relation to that is, material changes in these approved plans should be promptly reported to the minister and should be brought to the attention of the cabinet. Because if there's an adverse effect in a major project that is cost related, it is vital that that information be shared promptly and should not be within the bosom of the authority when at the end of the day it's going to become something that the public person have to address. So I think that there should be something that deals with these material changes and the need to report them on a prompt basis through the minister to the cabinet. Madam Speaker, since I have limited time and I have a lot more I'd like to say, but I'm not going to be permitted to do so, I just want to make a point here. There's a provision for directives that the MARA can give directives to these approving entities, which are local authorities and other bodies that deal with project approvals. And these directives are under a regime here there's no transparency in relation to directives that are given. The directives don't have to be gazetted according to this. There's no report to Parliament on directives that have been given. So what you have is NARA effectively second-guessing the agencies of the state or the bodies that are normally responsible for the approval process, imposing their own views on what the approval should or shouldn't say. And there's no transparency around that. And that should be, to my mind, and I would like to see provisions that require these directives to be made public through the Parliament. There should be a reporting mechanism on them. And I think the absence of that is a dangerous thing to build into a law of this nature. And then, of course, there are the step-in arrangements where if the authority issues a directive and the approving entity, the local authority or other regulatory body doesn't comply, then the minister can effectively step in under clause 24. And the minister may by order approve an application made subject to any terms and conditions, vary, modify, or remove a term, condition, or qualification to which an approval was made subject, and so on. Again, we need transparency with respect to step-in orders. They should be made public, they should be posted on the NARA website, they should be included in semi-annual reports to Parliament, because effectively what this is saying is that the minister can override what all the entities that the law has established to perform certain functions or may have decided are the conditions of approval of a particular project or the decision whether to approve or refuse. There ought to be transparency in the legislation in relation to these step-in requirements. This is a very extraordinary regime. It's an extraordinary regime. There's no existing regime like it. And so, therefore, there ought to be proper transparency in relation to it. I move to part 4 of the bill. Madam Speaker, I only have a minute left. Part 4 has this provision where this bill is brought to an end. We don't know when the minister responsible for this legislation will decide that the date of dissolution should arise. But when that decision is made, the authority is automatically dissolved. And when the conception of this as something that relates only to Hurricane Melissa reconstruction, when that was clearly the purpose of this, I could understand why they would have that in there. But given that this has morphed now into a regime for facilitating the expedition of private sector projects, I'm not quite sure why we still have this automatic dissolution arrangement in it. It doesn't really seem to make sense to me. I'd like to hear why they consider that to be appropriate. And there also, I noticed where it says, on the day of dissolution, all monies which became payable to the authority shall be paid into the consolidated fund. But if you have pending or incomplete projects, and all those resources now go into the consolidated fund, it could significantly delay the execution of those incomplete projects. I think there needs to be some thought put into that. And my last comments are in relation to in the schedule, Madam Speaker, there's no annual performance reviews provision for the CEO. There's no provision in terms of revocation of appointments. There's nothing to do with failure to achieve contracted deliverables or to satisfy key performance indicators. It is not the normal thing you would expect in a contract of employment with a senior executive. The provisions are more what you're accustomed to see in relation to an officer who's holding a public office rather than somebody running an organization as a CEO. And I think that is a peculiar thing. And the last point, Madam Speaker, is just to say these provisions which allow the CEO to sign authorizations under the seal of the authority on his own and to sign contracts and other documents on his own with no oversight, dangerous. This, from a governance perspective, this legislation is an aberration. It needs to be.
Leader of opposition, your mic is off. Leader of opposition, your mic is off. Give me the time. Now, members. No, it is not. I actually gave extra time.
Yeah, she gave it.
And it is in deference to the leader of opposition. Members, I'm asking you, please be reminded on the speaker's ruling in respect of order of speaking and use of the mic. I gave the extra time.
The person should get more time. I'm not have to say. In next from someone I'm
the member from St. Catherine
you
Northwest.
can't give them more time to give them. Somebody more. Say when. You can't give them more time if you don't give the other one them. And you have no solution? I don't know what you want to have. You can't give them more time if you don't give the other one. The boy did
Mr. Speaker, I find it unfortunate that such overreach is causing for this debate to deteriorate into almost a cross quarrel. I also want to remind the House of a statement made by the member from East Portland consistently that context matters. And a bill of this importance, I can't see why we're so hard and fast on time and the time of the leader of the opposition in particular. Now, the multiplicity of causes had caused for the Prime Minister himself to need for adequate coverage 2 hours. None of us there are expecting 2 hours ourselves. But the side, you open. And yeah, okay, so 1.5 hour minus interruption. But the importance of this bill, as has been highlighted by the Prime Minister, I don't think that it is reasonable for us to have been all intervened. In fact, there was an invitation from the Prime Minister for serious intervention upon this bill. And so I find that, and I will begin in short order, but there's a problem with Parliament if the Speaker dominates the Parliament. And that is what we are having.
Thank you.
The Speaker gets more time than the speakers. But let us start. Madam Speaker, the conversation on this bill, the conversation on the bill should rightfully start with the objectives of the bill. The objectives I've stated within the bill are as follows: for the efficient, coordinated, and transparent management of extraordinary time-bound reconstruction and resilience efforts, to focus on building back better to withstand the future climatic and geophysical events, Additionally, it speaks to B, to create a more robust climate resilient infrastructure, encouraging better land use and planning. C, to expedite private and public-private investment in priority sectors that address the structural economic vulnerabilities exposed by Hurricane Melissa, and to enable growth and diversification in Jamaica's economic base. Before we go outside, make us first recognize that Mr. Prime Minister, I want you to listen in particular, because I was a little bit surprised that within what the mandate was stated, that to enable growth and diversification of Jamaican economic base was found to be necessary in this particular bill under the NARA. However, the realities of Melissa are strong enough to support the bill. And because it is strong enough to support this bill, it is why I felt that it was unnecessary for exaggerations in some of our claims and conversations. Some of those exaggerations would include what is often repeated, that this was 4 times what was Hurricane Gilbert. And if we do not consider the reality of inflation and just the simple numbers, maybe we can come to that conclusion. However, the IDB indicated, and I quote, compared to the last major hurricane to strike Jamaica, Hurricane Gilbert in 1988, Hurricane Melissa was significantly more intense. Yet, while Gilbert, a Category 3 storm, caused damage estimated at 65% of GDP, Hurricane Melissa is estimated to have caused 12.2 billion or 56.7% of GDP. So without the grandstanding, Melissa is sufficient to stand on its own. And therefore, I became cautious when I read within the bill 4 times that of Hurricane Gilbert. Not very necessary. So what we have to go therefore is, what are the malice that we're seeking to solve? And your speech captured a few of the malice that we are seeking to solve. The mischief that we are seeking to solve. One of those mischief that was identified would have been that of speed. And one of those mischief that we were seeking to identify, yes, would have been that of speed. That there was quite a few realities of institutions that were too segmented, weren't working together, and that they did not qualify for the spectrum of work that was needed and the money that was needed to be spent. However, as has been highlighted by the minister, the leader of opposition, was that some of the chief entities of bottleneck would not have been included under this bill. So when you look at the reality that it indicates that it does not include agencies like the NEPAs and the customs and the NWA, those are some of the major contributors of bottleneck. And so therefore, how is it then that this bill would not have included those? While at the same time, had they been included, there would have been cause for caution as well, because how could this entity be seeking to direct, for example, a NEPA in how NEPA should function and how it should go about its business? Indeed, Mr. Prime Minister, when we look at some of the clauses, it is reason for concern. Clause 4, for example, indicate that they can consolidate and prioritize projects. Now, I don't think that that would be the mandate of NARA. I believe Cabinet should rightfully prioritize projects. That the current bill, as is stated, the Cabinet tell which projects, but the prioritization is in the arms of NARA. I believe that that is misplaced prioritization, because the general conversation among all the ministers and people who have to face the people in 5 years, I believe that that should have been the authority of the Cabinet more so than for prioritization, as in section 4A, should have been for NARA to execute. Additionally, sorry? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll come. I will come to that. Additionally, it indicated section 4F that it should cause projects, programs, and plans to include standard specification requirement for achievement of climate standards, disaster resilience by works to eliminate and mitigate the adverse effects of catastrophic climate and geophysical events. Again, I believe that while they are the implementing agencies, the standards should not be set by the people who are the ones to implement. The standards should be set for them to go forward and implement those particular standards. Now, when we look at the bill indicates that there should be a central coordinating agency, and this central coordinating agency would be NARA. And some examples were given of other similar types of agencies across the world. Now, when you look, for example, at those agencies, the intent of the bill was not found in many of those agencies. For example, there are documentaries made about how poor FEMA handled the realities that was out in Katrina. There are documentaries made about that. In your own presentation, you indicated that Peru gave up on their NARA and actually implemented a second system that had a British yes, and rights, and they gave up on their NARA. Boy, when me and the Prime Minister talk, I don't want to get in. They had a NARA system. The Prime Minister in his presentation indicated that politics intervened, and by extension, they had to wheel and come again. And then they had a second run, a bite at the cherry, and that bite of the cherry included partnership with Britain. And in that partnership with Britain, they were able to become more effective. And even though they maintained the central authority failed without the British intervention, where that partnership came between them and Britain. But we can have that debate because we don't want to finish our time. However, when it came to the bottleneck, there were some concerns within the central agency and the authority to the central agency. One of it is that they can direct and instruct and give timelines to the agencies. Now, Minister, I have some concerns about that. While it is that the large entities may qualify with the 15 million US, it is now our 150 million US, 15 now, right? If it is that that NARA, you know, when you are disrespected, you are upset. Yet you upset me by disrespecting. No, yes. I will do here and later. Now, what we're saying, Minister, is that you will know that there are multiple levels of investment in tourism. If it is that the 15 million can be prioritized by instruction to NARA without additional labor or labor force within these entities, then they would have to now reverse those that would have been more than likely in line by time, so that they can prioritize that in which NARA has given them a duty for. Within this bill, or within the conversations, I heard no conversation of a NARA appointed or a person with the duty for NARA activities within these agencies. So therefore, the agency with its similar workforce would then have to prioritize NARA and by extension deprioritize others that would have been in close proximity to being there. And to that extent, there becomes a problem within that space and that reality. Additionally, it says that the NARA can carry out or secure the laying out of development areas. I thought that was above NARA's capacity. That they can carry out or secure the laying out of development areas. I believe that the entities that NARA shouldn't be able to do that. Additionally, it says lay out, construct, rehabilitate roads and buildings and carry out such other building and engineering operations as may appear to it to be necessary or desirable in, on, over, under land within any area. I thought that that is the duty of a general planning system and not NARA in and of itself. So when you say NARA can lay out, construct, rehabilitate roads and buildings, as it says here, that may appear to it to be necessary, not appear to the cabinet to be necessary, not appear to the parliament to be necessary, but that appear to it, to NARA. I thought that would have gone too far. And it include other things like public gardens, public amenities, carry on any business or undertaking from the reconstruction and development of any area. I thought that was too wide. Then it says in F, engage in any other activity designed to promote the development of any area. Any activity in any area. That I believe. I think that NARA is subverting cabinet's duty to the people. And to that extent, I was confused by that. I also found that the authority shall, if lawful and practicable, utilize existing capacity, resources, facilities, and systems in government, which may be appropriate, co-opted, etc., were in some cases excessive. Now, again, I wouldn't repeat the leader, but he indicated that subject to subsection 5, the chief executive officer shall be employed as such remuneration, etc., and had duties that I feel should have been rightfully designated to a board. Now, I wanted to understand what is the negative of the concept of JAMRAC being the board, because JAMRAC's concept was these people would have been included. And I remember when I was in the ministry once upon a time, our board included multiple private sector functionaries on the entertainment board. So the fact that it is a board, a governance board, does not disqualify private sector functionaries to be a part of it. What disqualifies, what's the negative of JAMRAC actually being the board? Because as has been indicated, JAMRAC's only duty is to alert the public of discrepancies that it perceives. But it have no capacity to intervene, no power, no control, no consequence that it can do other than to show that we have seen things that are undeserving, and we don't see the great delay that a board can execute. It then says the authority may appoint and employ at such remuneration and on such terms and conditions as it thinks fits such other employees and agents as it thinks necessary for the proper carrying out and provision of this act. So the authority, without a board, can almost, all of we can get our work out of that authority. And everybody that we know can be doing, right? The unlimited, yes. It also says that they shall be paid to members of the committee. So this is where I became quite worried. The minister may appoint a committee to examine the report to the minister on any matter arising out of it or connected with any of the authority's powers, duties under this act. Now, I didn't understand from that Prime Minister if this was a single board or if at any time he needed information, he could have then moved forward to make a new board. So if he was going to consider tourism, he could make a tourism board. And if he was going to consider agriculture, he could make an agriculture board. And then the next clause suggests that they can be remunerated, not volunteer, that you could pay these boards to look at those things. And we felt that that would have been a problem. There was a sworn to secrecy. I won't delve too far in it, but I also felt that it didn't facilitate the whistleblowers act within the conversation of secrecy. I warned you already and you're still. Yes, right? There was a limited facilitation of the Whistleblowers Act, but it will be dealt more fulsome by a colleague of mine. The ministry may give direction or authority. In this case, it says that the minister, in the interest of effective performance by the authority of its function. So it became confusing because it almost was giving the NARA freedom to act until you reach section 13, where we took away that freedom and said, first of all, NARA should implement nothing until it's approved by cabinet. But the minister can intervene and tell NARA to do what he decided to do at any given time. In fact, it says that the minister that the authority shall act in compliance with any direction given under subsection 1. And subsection 1 said the minister may give direction to the authority. So therefore, anything that the minister tells the authority to do, the authority should then act in that way. And we believe that that is a little bit confusing, because on one standard, the authority could do as it saw fit, and on the other standard, it was actually going to give that permission. Within it, it indicates that the entity could be instructed almost by NARA to actually carry out a duty. And if that duty wasn't carried out, Mr. Speaker, then they could send up that authority up to the minister and ask for the minister to grant that approval to the entity. So to that extent, it indicates here that the minister could then step in at any time. Now, before we move to the minister's ability to step in, we also found that the projects under NARA seemed extremely wide. Now, for example, the hospitals that were mashed up, I didn't hear them in this, but I presume they would be. But then how would the Victoria Jubilee, the KPH, be under NARA? Now, if it is that we say that the procurement is a problem and we want to change procurement, then we'd have to, NARA is now doing everything that they want to do. Now, because of the lobby efforts of the minister from West Kingston, I could say, well, maybe this is resilience, because if there was high emergency, we could need a hospital like that. But how then the parliament fit into NARA? Under what resilience or reconstruction could the new parliament be a NARA project? That seems to be an overextension of what NARA should do and should be doing. And I think that is the reason why there was no sunset date for NARA. Because while it was indicated that NARA should last for 5 years, for some reason within this bill we could find no date for NARA to end. So any project over time that you want to put in, you can claim that this should go under NARA. And I believe that that is a problem moving forward. It indicated that they could give directives. An approving entity shall cause an application for approval or other input to be dealt with in compliance with the terms of any directive issued by the authority. So what it is saying is that if it is that there is an approving entity and the authority gives it an instruction, then that had a duty to carry out the authority's instruction. And if they didn't carry out the instruction, then the authority could complain to the minister. But the authority, before complaining to the minister, would then have to get a private entity to review what the government entity was already reviewing, so as to take the private entity's opinion to the minister. No, don't be fooled by the person behind your brand. He has indicated that if an entity is in disagreement with the authority should seek to validate its disagreement by employing all right. They can proceed with consideration of an application for approval where the approving entity may otherwise delay or decline to process the application solely on the basis that the approval or the input from another approving entity is yet to be granted or given. Relying on approvals previously granted by the approving entity for standardized design or pre-approval, they can seek to modify or make exceptions for zoning requirement, make decisions on the application for the approval of other inputs. It indicates, therefore, that to address non-compliance, the authority shall not make application for a step-in, they call it, without first obtaining independent expert advice on the matter. So what did we say that was different? What did we say that was different? No, but are you saying it's a good thing or that what I said was different?
Member. You don't have much time left, so focus on your presentation, member.
So, Mr. Speaker, as was indicated, and I'm proud of you, you're asking it well. As was indicated, the authority shall not make an application for a stepping without A, first obtaining independent expert advice on the matter. Now, one can easily see the cost that will incur moving forward, right? Now, I guess money is of no moment. Then, without obtaining, and then B, unless the authority is satisfied that on the consideration of the approval requirements, the advice referred to in the paragraph A exists. So we see that as a major concern. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, is that if I was the lawyer for the procurement process, I would say I have multiple evidence that procurement is not as guilty as we're seeking to make procurement. This entire bill seems to suggest that procurement is the chief hindrance on the capacity to implement. But if we look at our current situation with Spark program, for example, which have already passed procurement, which have already been granted in contract, the level of inefficiencies continue. Indeed, we have seen just in the last conversation over the budget that Spark, which was to end in 2027, have indicated that it not end until 2030, and that funds that were supposed to
Yeah, but turn off the mic. Turn off all of the mics, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member speaking is misleading the House. Spark, based on all documents submitted to the House, is a contract-bound program that ends in the next financial year, not 2030, and he needs to provide evidence to say that Spark is ending in 2030.
Mr. Speaker, there's an unfortunate habit that has evolved for us to wantonly disrupt each other. Now, if the minister wanted to say that he hasn't spoken as yet, he can say that after. However, the book that was published by the government called the Estimate of Expenditures indicated that they would have been spending for Spark up to the 40 billion up until 2030.
Yes,
He was asked about that and he himself responded. So I do not know. Refresh himself. The minister also indicated in answering the question that he presumed it might have been a mistake, right? And that he would get back to us, for which he did not get back to us. So the fact of the matter is that the estimate of expenditure, yes, yes, and I'm reclaiming my time. So no problem.
Invito Pancha
Mr. President,
Foolishness.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that as is, the bill introduced
The man the panel liberate side about 12 about enough in it.
bottleneck
And I
in
see a
transfer
document that say
to NARA.
2030.
It introduced
They
great
don't
risk
know what the
of
match at
corruption
say.
masked by the process in which contracts are selected. It introduced great risk that small investors may be at the back of the line because of the duty of prioritization within entities that already claim that they have understaffed realities. It includes many risks because it creates expectations that may not be likely to be executed within the public. And it creates many risks because it puts within a single individual a certain level of authority. We on this side are of the opinion that anything that is necessary should be done for our reclamation, for our rebuilding, for our re-engaging of the people and our economic activity. However, we also believe, as I agree with the leader of the opposition, that we should have a conversation, a more fulsome conversation of what NARA should look like by having a joint select committee. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. Members, start over. All the mics are off. Start over. So member from Central, sorry, you're not Central anymore, sorry. Member from South, Manchester South. Turn your mic on.
Hold on. Members, the speaker had referenced her original ruling in relation to mics and to participate. We see the challenge that we have when multiple people turn on their mics. So please keep off your mics. When the presentation is drawing to an end, you can indicate that you want to speak and the mic will be activated, right? Yes, so there is, again, reference is made to the ruling by the speaker. I think, yes, it does show that you would want to speak. Yeah. All right, so I think we have the member from South Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had originally intended to contribute to the debate because I was confident that the leader of the opposition would have covered the points. And I think the use of the standing orders to curtail the important contribution of the leader of the opposition was very unfortunate. Though consistent with a growing practice of suppression of voices not supporting the government.
All right.
Members of Parliament were not elected to come here to serve the standing orders. The standing orders are here to serve the Parliament. And when it is used to stifle and suppress an important contribution on a bill that is so significant to the future of this country, it is disgraceful. Mr. Speaker, we can begin by acknowledging the scale of the crisis. Hurricane Melissa inflicted devastation of historic proportions. That demands urgency, it demands coordination, it demands leadership. But above all, it demands accountability. And that, Mr. Speaker, is precisely what this bill fails to provide. It is a blank check without guardrails. This legislation creates an authority with sweeping powers over billions of dollars in reconstruction expenditure, yet strips away the very safeguards that protect public funds. The authority is empowered to procure goods, works, and services directly. It can enter into any transaction it deems necessary, and it is funded by unlimited parliamentary appropriations and other inflows. Mr. Speaker, this is not reconstruction governance. This is a fiscal free-for-all. Where are the explicit procurement rules? Where are the independent oversight mechanisms? Where is the requirement for competitive tendering, public disclosure, or value for money audits in real time? Instead, we are asked to trust blindly that this authority will regulate itself. That is not how Westminster democracy works. What we are seeing here is executive capture. The Prime Minister controlling everything. The architecture of this authority is not independent. It is subordinate to the executive. The CEO is appointed by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister can issue binding directions and the CEO must comply. The cabinet alone determines which projects are approved and which are strategic. This is not a balanced institutional design. This is centralized executive control over project selection, procurement, and execution. In any serious Westminster parliamentary democracy, such executive concentration of power would be offset by a statutorily independent board, by parliamentary committee pre-approval of major projects, by mandatory publication of decisions and contracts. None of that is here. None of that. Instead, we have a structure where the same political directorate decides, directs, and effectively executes. This is the very definition of unchecked executive power. And then, when we speak about the stepping power to override the entire regulatory state. In a sense, this is perhaps the most alarming feature of this bill. Under sections 21 to 24, the authority can issue directives to regulatory bodies, force timelines, and ultimately ask the minister to override those bodies directly. The minister can then grant approvals himself, modify or remove conditions imposed by the regulators, and those decisions carry full legal effect as if made by the original authority. Mr. Speaker, let us call this what it is. This is the executive branch arrogating to itself the powers of every regulatory authority in Jamaica. Planning, environmental, utilities, and more. All in the name of expedition. But we have seen this movie before. We have seen this movie before. A recent example in Europe. I would call it the Orbanesque playbook. This model bears an uncomfortable resemblance to what we have seen in Hungary. Immersion emergency powers were used to centralize procurement authority. Regulatory checks were bypassed in the name of speed. Public contracts were channeled through politically controlled entities. Oversight institutions were weakened or sidelined. The result was a reconstruction and development model widely criticized across Europe for cronyism, opaque procurement, and misallocation of public funds. We must ask ourselves, are we building for resilience, or are we building a Jamaican version of that same model? I want to turn to what I might call the perfect conditions for abuse. The combination of secrecy and indemnity. The bill compounds the risk by combining these two dangerous provisions. The first is the secrecy clause. Officials are legally bound to treat documents as confidential with criminal penalties for disclosure, not administrative, criminal penalties. And then these officials are indemnified for any actions taken in their roles. So you're combining secrecy, executive control, weak oversight, massive discretionary spending. Mr. Speaker, this is not the formula for efficiency. This is a fertile ground for corruption. They can talk about accountability to Parliament. Yes, the bill provides for annual reports, audited accounts, tabling in Parliament. But let us be honest, this is after the fact accountability. We see it in the Auditor General reports every year, but it's long after the horse has gone through the gate. By the time Parliaments see these reports, contracts will have been signed, funds will have been spent, decisions will be irreversible. Accountability is not just retrospective, it is contemporaneous and preventive. The irony is that in the memorandum it speaks of transparent management. Yet procurement is not transparently structured. Decisions are not subject to real-time disclosure. Oversight is not independent. Confidentiality is criminally enforced. Mr. Speaker, this is not transparency. This is opacity dressed up in legislative language. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion,
All right, then.
Mr. Speaker, this bill sets a dangerous precedent. It is not merely about reconstruction. It is about how Jamaica governs large-scale public expenditure in times of crisis. And what it proposes is deeply troubling. Concentrated executive power, minimal oversight, weak transparency, legal tools to override institutions. We all want Jamaica rebuilt quickly, efficiently, and resiliently. But we must not rebuild Jamaica on a foundation of weakened democracy and compromised accountability. Because if we do so, Mr. Speaker, we may rebuild the roads, we may rebuild the bridges, but we will have undermined the very institutions that hold this country together. I therefore urge this House to reject this bill in its current form or to amend it fundamentally to restore transparency, accountability, and proper Westminster-style governance. Thank you.
Members, could you please turn off all the mics? Turn off all the mics. The next speaker going to be the member from Portland Eastern. And after the Portland Eastern, we're going to have the member from St. Andrew North Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you. I see you have returned. Madam Speaker, I have to give my contribution, and it is one in a legal context. I will just address the first aspect, which is, it speaks of a bill entitled, and there's just one particular aspect that I'm highlighting. It says for resilience generally. And it is in that regard that I'm formulating my contribution. Now, section 2 speaks about definition. And I will just simply say that there are, in relation to resilience, Madam Speaker, the definition of resilience in this regard, I would only suggest humbly that it be included. The absence of it leaves it wide open, and it could contemplate resilience as we make it up as we go, and it needs to give some form of direction in that regard. So I would just put for the record a definition similar to that in the UK, which says the Act ought to define resilience as the ability to anticipate, assess, prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from natural hazards, deliberate attacks, geopolitical instability, disease outbreaks, and other disruptive events, civil emergencies, or threats to our way of life. I'm taking a point, but to say, Mr. Prime Minister, no, I'm using, but I just wish to say that because this bill comes from Parliament, and we are invited to say we are collectively passing legislation, the legislation at all times must contemplate gaps. We must fill them so that we don't appear to be incompetent. That is my contribution. Thank you. Now, in relation to, and I would invite my friends. I would invite my friends also to look at section 19.3. And 19.3 speaks about the plans and what the authorities shall do. In 19.3 it says the development of projects, programs, and plans shall prioritize. 19.3b speaks of the achievement of climate and disaster resilience. That again is a legal term of art that requires definition for us. I would only suggest then that we would have something similar to say that disaster resilience is the ability of communities and organizations and states to adapt to and recover from hazards, shocks, or stresses without compromising long-term prospects of development. Again, because it is a term of art, it's something that ought to be included in the definition for your consideration. Now, I speak about vagueness, and vagueness, it requires definitions or revisiting the language so that it is not open to absurd interpretations when it leaves Parliament. So, Parliament may not have intended a particular interpretation, but the way the legislation is drafted, you might find that Judges may interpret it differently and it goes outside, but it also brings us to litigation that I don't think that it would be necessary if we spend the time and mature consideration to ensure that the legislation meets the object and purpose. So if the bill were to pass without the necessary amendments, we will find ourselves in that situation. So I'm just humbly suggesting that we revisit in that regard. For example, Madam Speaker, the legislation speaks of the minister, and my question to the House, who is the minister in this regard? If it is the Prime Minister, the legislation speaks in the schedule, separate from the minister, what the Prime Minister can do in relation to revocation of the CEO. So if the Prime Minister and the Minister is one in the same, it becomes problematic. And I'm simply saying, who is the Minister? That's open-ended, and it's something to consider in relation to interpretation. Very well. No, this part, for this, with the wide, I'm saying, no, I understand that, Mr. Prime Minister, but you would appreciate that in this particular legislation, it makes references to the Prime Minister and it makes to a minister. So because of that, I'm saying it needs to have clarity, because there are 3 ministers operating all at once in this legislation. I'm assuming the Minister of Finance. I see the minister, which could be the Prime Minister. Then there is delegation. There's so many things happening at once that when it comes to the filling the accountability gap, this will be necessary. So it's just revisiting, and it's not difficult to do in a simple amendment. Who is the minister? And that falls within definition. I will only say in relation to directives and directions that it opens up Pandora's box. That is something that can be revisited. Now, I do not see where in the act that putting vulnerable people at the center of our risk assessment for the rebuilding and resilience effort. It's nowhere in the act. I read it here, I read it elsewhere, and the assumption from a human rights claim, from the speaking for the least among us, which oftentimes is the youth and the elderly. The rest can say include me, but they're rebuilding, reconstruction, resilience ought to consider the vulnerable. That is absent. That's something we need to think about. Also, because it is important to develop resilience, which was absent from the definition, there is nothing to measure resilience. I would only hope or urge my colleagues that we include something in the legislation itself that shows that we are trying to measure resilience, not in the big world, but for Jamaica or Ireland. So because there's currently no common methodology for measuring overall national resilience, having a benchmark from which to assess whether Jamaica is ready to absorb and adapt to threats and risks would allow us to measure the effectiveness of our reconstruction and resilience effort and model so that it becomes apparent we are making informed decisions on the trade-offs between investing and intervening in different risk areas. So given the wide powers to the minister and the CEO under the act, it is important that something is included. A mechanism is included, and I don't think that appointing a board to do that or any mention of such a board, in the absence of that, the legislation would be wholly ineffective to achieve the object and purpose that it was intended for. Now, I'll just address my concerns seriatim or point by point in relation to the sections. Having said the definition section 2 now says that the minister may by order alter paragraph A of the definition of works. Now, one would appreciate that in the absence of a definition of resilience, it affects the power of the minister. So again, that's my pitch to say we have to include the resilience aspect. Section 4, functions of the authority. Madam Speaker, I need your protection on this one. At paragraph F, there seems to be a typo, AND. Please fix it. Now, I'll just work with me, please. In this day and age, it's important. There is a section 5.5 which speaks about what the Minister of Finance, the minister responsible for public service, that in relation to salaries. It is missing there is an accountability gap. So if you look at 5.5, it says that the chief executive officer, he creates people who he hires, and he's paying them, and it has salary cap, similar to that in the government world. When it comes to section 71, the minister appoints his committee, and they are able to get remuneration. It also says honorarium, salary, or fees, and such allowances. I would simply say that this section is circumventing the salary scheme, and as it is not subjected to section 5. I'm just simply saying it's similar to section 5. I'm just saying similar to section 5.5. It says subject to section 5, the chief executive officer shall be employed. I'm saying in the absence of that at section 7.2, you can see there is a gap. It is simply an accountability gap. I have that. I understand that. But I'm saying it is a salary. The salaries has no cap under section 7.2. It has absolutely none. No, section 7.2. Section 7.2. It is an accountability gap. There is no salary cap, and it's in the absence of subject to section 5.5, wide powers. And this is in the vein that section 8 says they are to be paid from the funds of the authority, which shall consist of 8A, such monies as may from time to time be placed at its disposition for the purpose of this act by Parliament, and B, all other monies and other property which may in any manner become payable to or vested in the authority in respect of any matter incidental to its function. That is where the monies come from, and section 7.2 allows these persons to be paid from that. And there's no section 5, so it's not subject to the minister responsible. Now, I turn to the aspect of I will call it cost to taxpayers. So we must pass laws that will minimize taxpayers being called upon to foot the bill for waste, corruption, and lack of accountability resulting from the accountability gap that is present in this legislation. For example, there is in the schedule resignation of the CEO as well as revocation of appointment by the Prime Minister. It is a feature that promotes political pageantry. If in the event, and I will address secrecy versus indemnity, but if in the event the CEO does something untoward and at the end of it, it's wasting taxpayers' money, all the Prime Minister has to do is to revoke his CEOship. Simple. Just say you're no longer the CEO, and the Prime Minister would have pretty much says, I've done my duty, the person was a miscreant and don't include me. Just simply fire him, and we would have, the Parliament or can't be that way. That is an example. So that in and of itself has to be revisited in terms of how we deal with it. And here's it. We have what is known as the criminalizing for disclosure versus indemnity for conduct in good faith. So I know Damon earlier said the member from St. Catherine Northwest earlier borrowed my context matters and don't intend to pay me for it. But I must say, context in fact matters. There is my only critique of this is that we can't turn ordinary citizens and even workers who in good faith, where there are competing legislations, we cannot criminalize them for having integrity and for having good conscience. I'm saying that in the vein that in the absence of national security, what would be the basis to block access to information? So this is the ATI legislation, and where transparency is concerned, and if anyone has ever used the ATI legislation, one of the first answers is we cannot give you the information because of national security. In relation to what Section 14 is saying, is that the employee would not be able to give out information in relation to any type of document, and the document may not necessarily be national security. The document may not be one of national security. So we use the secrecy aspect of and put them in legislation oftentimes, and it is just a misunderstanding of the object and purpose for that. And I would invite us to revisit this aspect of it, because well, if I would like to say it is a misunderstanding, because if it were by design, it actually doesn't, because unless a simple fix would be Section 14.2, in the absence of it using the word prescribed persons, and I would also listen, I'm saying this is a term of art because we have a Protected Disclosure Act 2011, and it speaks of prescribed persons. This says permitted, and these words are terms of art. It's a simple fix, and I'm inviting the Parliament as legislators to fix it. If we simply say prescribed and designated persons, it would fix a simple gap. A simple accountability gap, especially when we're calling on employees to be brought before the court and ultimately convicted. It's a simple fix. It can be accepted or rejected, no problem. But again, the Protected Disclosure Act 2011 on a Section 9, it speaks of a feature, the Auditor General, who is always in Parliament from time to time, where the member from St. Catherine Northwest has said that it is the whistleblower act or section. Just appreciate that it is important to ensure that it doesn't weaken it doesn't minimize or weaken other legislations. We can't draft or try to pass legislation that conflicts with competing legislation, especially when the Protected Disclosure Act, its mandate is to ensure that persons are able to report and protected when they find that conduct from employers or employees are untoward. And it is a part of strengthening the corruption meter, and so left unchecked, it's wholly problematic. That brings us to the other side, the versus, which would be the indemnity. Again, we spoke about the ability to simply resign, a CEO who is allowed to resign, versus simply be fired. Again, the taxpayers would be called upon to pay court costs for the CEO or other persons employed or employees in situations where the legislation is speaking about honestly and acting in good faith, and there is no meter to simply measure what that good faith is, especially if it's a civil case. And when you think about matters where if it remains in the parish court, the general rule is that it's a fine or time system. So you may find a CEO in the parish court being called upon to pay a fine and is indemnified by the legislation. I find that problematic, especially when you juxtapose that with what is called the stepping order and the ability to circumvent the entities which are protecting things such as the environment, whether it be human rights, whether it be just property rights. That is National Land Agency, National Works Agency, NEPA, all of these agencies which operate under what is known as mature consideration. So this is in the vein that when it comes to situations of environment, human rights, and capitalizing on the human potential, whether these entities know it or not, they are the ones responsible for ensuring that one thing doesn't affect the other. And so the stepping order would then act as a mechanism to circumvent that. And then when it comes to anything going wrong, all those entities will say is, but my power was taken away from me by virtue of this legislation. And as such, we are then called upon to say, what do we do? And it becomes, again, political pageantry. So I'm just simply saying that we ought to look at that in its entirety, because taking away the power, especially rebuilding, is, notwithstanding that it has to be expedited, is something that must be done with mature consideration. I'm sure that we can appreciate that. So, as it is now, I will simply say that there's more work to be done before, if this legislation were to pass as is, it would be problematic and embarrassing for our parliament. And there are legislators and persons much senior to me, and I call upon you all to back me on the amendments that I speak on, and we are to be responsible as we are pushing legislation through. Thank you. Madam Speaker.
Member from St. Andrew West? Northwest? Northwest? Oh, the member from St. Andrew North Central. You too? But who has that?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill. So let us be clear from the outset that this is not routine legislation. And as the Prime Minister indicated when opening this debate last week, this is among the most consequential pieces of legislation this Parliament has been asked to consider in the modern era of Jamaica's development. And it's consequential for the simple reason, I don't need to go through all the statistics, but Hurricane Melissa was catastrophic. One of the worst hurricanes on record, costing Jamaica $12.2 billion US, or $1.95 trillion, more than half our GDP. 215,000 structures damaged, some of them destroyed, 600 schools impacted, health infrastructure compromised, major roads, drainage systems, utilities destroyed. Entire communities left devastated, towns such as Black River badly damaged, displacing thousands of residents and exposing deep vulnerabilities. So the scale, Madam Speaker, of the destruction underscored the urgent need for coordinated national reconstruction and resilience efforts. So it's not theory, it is about delivery. Now, we know the criticism, and this is democracy, it is healthy, but much of what is being said does not really, frankly, stand up to a careful reading of the bill as it now exists. Because when you move past the speculative points and actually examine the text, what you find is not recklessness. What you find is structure. What you find is discipline. And what you find is accountability built into law. Madam Speaker, this bill is grounded in a moment of extreme national urgency. Hurricane Melissa did not just damage infrastructure, it exposed structural weaknesses. And as the Prime Minister said, what has been missing is not the dream, but the institutional machinery to turn that dream into delivered reality. And that is what the bill provides. So, Madam Speaker, this foundation is structure, it's not chaos. Under clauses 1 and 2, the purpose is clear. It's post-disaster reconstruction and long-term resilience. Under clause 3, NARA is a body corporate, not informal, not ad hoc, but a legal institution with defined responsibilities and obligations. It's not, Madam Speaker, a temporary committee or task force. This is institutional machinery for national execution. Madam Speaker, at the heart of this bill, clause 4, this is where the criticism begins and where it should end. Because clause 4 does something very simple. It creates a single central coordinating authority to plan, prioritize, implement, and track national reconstruction. That is not dangerous. That is necessary. And as the proverb reminds us, too many cooks spoil the broth. Fragmentation is the enemy of recovery. And this bill is designed to eliminate fragmentation. So, Madam Speaker, let me give a direct response to this is a too broad legislative effort. And I heard the opposition leader and the member from St. Catherine, Northwestern, and the member from Manchester South. We hear that the mandate is too broad. But let us be serious, reconstruction is broad. You cannot fix roads without drainage. You can't fix homes without utilities. And you can't build communities without infrastructure. The bill frankly reflects reality, but critically, it is not unfounded. It is anchored by cabinet-approved projects. And I think the people of Jamaica should be reminded that the cabinet of Jamaica is not a standalone authority. It's a temporary custodian of power granted by the people themselves. The government is elected by the citizens. Every minister holds their seat as a servant of public trust, legally bound to a mandate derived directly from the ballot box. And to prevent the abuse of this borrowed power, we have checks and balances. We have an Auditor General, we have parliamentary oversight, we have Julian Robinson chairing the Public Accounts Committee, we have legislative and judicial scrutiny, and we have many other transparent mechanisms in this functional democracy that we call Jamaica. So you have cabinet-approved projects, clause 17. We have structured programs and plans, clause 18 and 19. Full auditing as a standard and reporting, clauses 9 to 11. And of course, we have the dissolution under part 4. So this is not a free-for-all. This is a structured flexibility under law. Madam Speaker, another claim is that the bill prioritizes speed over quality, and that is simply incorrect. Clauses 18 and 19 require structured programs, costed projects, monitoring systems, and critically, climate resilience and prioritization of vulnerable communities. So this is not rebuilding what failed. This is building what will last. Madam Speaker, I hear the points about power and concentration of power. And let us deal directly with this concern about leadership because this is really a problem. I don't know what it is. I don't know what we're drinking. I don't know what we're drinking in the country. Yes, the CEO. Yes, the Chief Executive Officer has responsibility under Clause 5. But let me ask you a simple question. In a national reconstruction effort, who should be responsible? Because history shows us what happens when no one is. And as the Prime Minister rightly stated, when accountability is diffused, institutions start to protect the processes rather than deliver outcomes, and the people suffer. So the bill avoids that failure. And importantly, and this is the CEO fits, the CEO is not unchecked. You have cabinet approval, clause 17, ministerial direction, clause 13, full sum audit and financial controls, clause 9, parliamentary reporting in clause 10 and 11, public transparency in clause 20, and I really want to draw attention to that clause 20 because this is really phenomenal. It says, it requires the authority to maintain a register of approved reconstruction and resilience projects, including descriptions and applicable programs and plans. And importantly, the register must be made available electronically for public inspection, providing direct transparency. So this is not a concentration without restraint. This is leadership. This is clear leadership within a framework of accountability. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed because none of the opposition members really pulled on any prominent examples internationally, right? We have to step outside of Jamaica. I heard you're Hungarian. I don't know what that was about. But let us step outside Jamaica for a moment. Because the world, that's in a fulsome way. No, not fulsomely. The world has already run this experiment and we have seen failures all around. 2010 earthquake on our lovely neighbor Haiti. Billions in aid, but no effective central authority. They had a commission, an interim Haiti Recovery Commission. $13 billion committed, only $6 billion spent, and who knows where it went. They had fragmented actors, weak coordination. The Prime Minister actually chaired the committee along with a former US president and other critical stakeholders. It failed. New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, the great United States of America. Multiple levels of government failed to coordinate. Bureaucracy slowed the response, and the entire community is lagged for over a decade. Then we look at our neighbor, one of our neighbors, Puerto Rico, 2017 Hurricane Maria, again a part of the United States. They had funding that existed, but the approvals were slow. The authority was fragmented. They set up a Central Office of Recovery and Reconstruction and Resiliency 2 weeks after the hurricane. An expert report now points out that they will probably get to fulsome completion of all the recovery efforts by 2051. Why? Because oversight paralysis. They had a Central Office of Recovery giving oversight. You had FEMA giving oversight. The Housing and Urban Development Corporation giving oversight. The Department of Energy giving oversight. The Governor's Office giving oversight. And then all sorts of stakeholder groups in Puerto Rico giving oversight. And this is wealthy Puerto Rico, part of the US. $86 billion obligated, and they're only might to spend $40 billion out of it. So the pattern, Madam Speaker, is undeniable. Plans are nothing. Execution is everything. Recovery does not fail because of money. And here we have the great United States, full of money. Authority was fragmented, approvals are slow, leadership is unclear, and systems cannot execute. And that is exactly what this bill fixes. This bill establishes a single coordinating authority, again, clause 4. Structured programs and plans, clauses 18 and 19. Approved accelerated mechanisms, clauses 21 to 24. cabinet accountability
I'm having a wait one.
and audit and reporting. This, Madam Speaker, is not chaka chaka legislation. So, Madam Speaker, as it relates to approval of bottlenecks clauses 21 to 24, and I think I heard the member say Catherine Douglas speaking to this. This is one of the strongest features actually, because this is where most countries involved in post-disaster fail. These clauses coordinate agencies, it sets timelines, it issues directives, it allows structured escalation, but with safeguards. Expert advice is required, written justification, and opportunity for response. So this is not bypassing governance. This is fixing bureaucratic paralysis. And it's important we make a careful note of that. Madam Speaker, there is concern about oversight. Yes, let us deal with it clearly. Inside the bill again, the accounts and audit provisions, clause 9, reporting clause 10 and 11, transparency again, clause 20. Outside the bill, yes, but critically, the government has established JAMROC, which is chaired by a Jamaican son of a Stanford professor, Peter Blair Henry, who, by the way, sits on two of the biggest boards in the world, Citigroup and Nike. This is somebody with a reputation to protect. And this body will provide independent public oversight, reports on performance, and introduce a national accountability lens, similar to EPOC. And importantly, performance will be based on measurable outcomes, not processes. And Madam Speaker, oversight will include broad stakeholder input, including the opposition. So, Madam Speaker, the claim that there's no oversight is simply not correct. What we have is statutory accountability and external independent oversight. Madam Speaker, let us be clear. Clauses 9, audited accounts, Auditor General has full access. Clauses 10 and 11, reports to Parliament. The Public Electronic Register, clause 20. This is transparency in law. It's not promise, it's not theory. As we move forward, NARA, finally, it is not an endless body. On the part for NARA is dissolved. Assets are transferred, records are preserved, mission completed. It is temporary, targeted intervention. So, Madam Speaker, let us strip the debate down to the truth. This is not unchecked power. It is structured under cabinet, ministerial, and parliamentary reporting. This is not weak governance. It is planning, it is monitoring, and it is resilience, all mandated. This is not a lack of oversight. Wholesome auditing, reporting, and a reputable board of JAMROC.
I am so sorry. Please, me, I beg you. See?
This is not opacity, as transparency is embedded in law. And this is not permanent because the authority is time-bound. So, Madam Speaker, they say well done is better than well said.
I think in my laptop bag. In my handbag,
The difference between collapse and recovery is not the scale of the disaster, it is the quality of the response. And as we have seen, Madam Speaker, 2005 Hurricane Katrina, the 2010 Haiti earthquake, and the 2017 Hurricane Maria impact on Puerto Rico. Weak coordination, slow execution, and unclear leadership allowed confidence to unravel, sometimes for years. For the US, they're rich and powerful, so they will figure it out. Haiti, not so lucky. Jamaica has avoided that trap by restoring utilities quickly, mobilizing credible financing early $6.7 billion from all the multilateral institutions, and establishing a clear institutional driver through NARA. The country has anchored confidence at a critical moment, giving businesses, and the people of Jamaica a visible path to stability and growth. Madam Speaker, I support this bill.
Hey.
Member from St. Andrew West, that's Member Hilton. The member from St. Andrew West.
Madam Speaker, there is an African saying that if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go long, far, or in this case sustainably, go together. No, Madam Speaker, what in the nature of the disaster that we're faced with and the response that is required, a balance must be struck. The question for this House and ultimately the people of Jamaica is, has this balance been struck within this legislation that is before us? There are clear gaps and concerns.
Marvin,
Speakers
you need
before
to
me
be
have
first off.
raised
You need to be first off.
number of those issues, number of those
You need
concerns.
to be first half. You say
I am
no.
going to
It done in
focus
the
my
go like done with just a clear
brief
out
intervention
each
on
page.
same clause 18 and 19 that was just spoken about, and for which
Just
the
in a
speaker
two part
before
here.
me see an anchor and see the solution. But as someone asked, will the anchor hold? Madam Speaker, I represent a constituency that everyone knows is disaster prone because it sits on the coastline and at the foothills that comes from northwest all the way down. And I have communities that once the clouds get dark, I start to fret. And invariably, after the rains, there's a massive cleanup problem. I have communities like New Haven, Seaview Gardens, Riverton, and other areas that are affected from time to time. It is true that this is a response to Melissa and the destruction caused by Melissa. And that is largely in the West. The bill is drawn in a way that is more general because it recognizes that it is not just about recovery, but it's about resilience. And the resilience of which we speak is not only to be found in the West, it's broad. And therefore, I am pleased that it recognizes and there is a possibility that these areas of great sensitivity traditionally and known spots of disaster prone areas is the opportunity for a resilient response. Because the hurricane, Melissa, was in the West, but the hurricane is likely to come the next time. And I must tell you that I breathed a sigh of relief when Hurricane Melissa speared Kingston because had it come in this area, I don't know what might have happened to a lot of the community and the people in my constituency. So we have to consider that we have to look at how have we addressed the vulnerabilities so that when the hurricane come next time, that we prevent the kind of disaster that we may have avoided only because Hurricane Melissa took a different course. So, Madam Speaker, as I look at the bill, and I look at clause 18 and 19, the bill has adopted a very artful way of addressing the issue of consultation and inclusion. So it uses in 19 and 18 and 19 the term, the artful phrase that in consultation with relevant persons. Now I want to put it to you, Madam Speaker, that a bill of this importance, and given the concerns that I am addressing, of these constituencies, these vulnerable constituencies, does this bill speak to consulting the people in these constituencies? Or am I assured that they will be included in any consultation that takes place under this legislation? How am I assured? And I want to suggest to you that it cannot be left just to the goodwill of the CEO of NAM. Clear direction must be given in the legislation to say communities and affected communities, and they can even, because they are known, these zones are known zones. It's not anything that we are surprised about. Those zones are known. How will they be assured that they will be included in consultation, and that whatever the designs for projects that come out, that they will be included and their vulnerabilities addressed? I am not, this gives me no confidence. I don't see it, and I'd like the Prime Minister to address that, to say how do known vulnerable communities that we struggle with year in, year out, that we spend this kind of money, we recover, we reconstruct, we rebuild, and yet resilience escape these communities. How? So, because for me, resilience is not just a technical exercise. It's both social, and yes, it is political. And the question is, how can I rest assured that the resilience of which we speak, the building back better, that we all want, will address those known vulnerable zones and communities? It's not clear to me from this bill and the design of this bill that this is addressed in a comfortable way. And I believe that it is not just about top-down building, it is about bottom-up as well. And the communities, I don't see communities referenced anywhere in this bill. I don't. And I think, Prime Minister, we have to address the issues of equity, inclusion, and communities. Even in the planning that I've heard about, I don't see any. No, you don't understand much.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I don't, Prime Minister. I don't, Prime Minister, see where the communities and even in the planning exercise, which is critical to the project development. These are in a different process. Well, I need to at least be assured what that is, because it doesn't speak to it in this legislation. All right. So, Prime Minister, there are gaps, and we can move quickly. But I suggest to you that there are risks involved, reputational risk, in not doing anything and in overdoing some things. And the risk of corruption is real, and we need to address that. You can kiss your teeth all you want. Yeah, but it's real, and I think we need to make sure that the safeguards are addressed in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Next is the member from St. Andrew Northwest.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, I've been a member of this house for a little over a year, and that there are a lot of bills that I've seen come to this house that I have not commented on or contributed on. But this bill is so important. There's no way I could not have a bill of this magnitude. Madam Speaker, I want to join with my colleague and friend and from St. Andrew, a neighbor from St. Andrew North Central, in full support of this bill. Madam Speaker, Hurricane Melissa caused unprecedented damage. Madam Speaker, first of all, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Hurricane Melissa caused unprecedented damage, estimated at some 12 million United States dollars. Billion. I have the time, you know. I have the time. 6 months on, thousands of Jamaicans, 6 months on, thousands of Jamaicans still await full recovery. The National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill, NARA, tabled by the Most Honorable Prime Minister last week, establishes a dedicated time-bound statutory authority with a clear mandate to lead national construction. Supporting this legislation demonstrates our commitment to moving from emergency relief to structured, resilient rebuilding without further delay. We understand the frustration being expressed by members of the public and indeed the opposition. But what we are facing is not routine disruption. It is an unprecedented catastrophe, the scale of which most countries across the world have never experienced. So we understand the urgency and we understand the impatience. People want to see progress and they want to see it right now. But even as we acknowledge that reality, we must also take the opportunity to clarify something very important. Each week, in the media and in this very space, we hear concerns about the pace of certain aspects of the recovery effort. We have also heard comparisons being made between the pace of the public sector response and that of private entities. Members, these are not like-for-like comparisons. The protocols and procedures that govern government operations, particularly procurement, are fundamentally different from those in the private sector. They are designed to ensure transparency, fairness, and accountability in the use of public resources. And that accountability does not pause in a time of crisis. Even as we respond to this
No,
catastrophe,
no, the mafia
we're still required to operate within a framework of good governance. We're still managing a country, and we must do so in a way that can stand up to scrutiny both now and in the future. So while the pace at times appears slower than some would like,
clean up your next
it is not due to inaction. It is a result of a system that must balance urgency with responsibility. Our commitment is not to rebuild, but to rebuild properly, transparently, and in a way that serves the best interests of the Jamaican people. In order to achieve this bill has been tabled to ensure our rebuilding efforts keep up with the pace of private effort and, of course, the demands and welfare of the Jamaican people. Madam Speaker, Jamaica cannot afford to have billions in unspent funds while roads, schools, and hospitals remain in disrepair. Madam Speaker, those are the words of the member from St. Andrews South Eastern March last year regarding the pace of procurement. Though it was not referring to Hurricane Melissa or Nara at that time, the facts are true today, and I say even more relevant given the devastation experienced in Western Jamaica. For that reason, this government has sought to fill the gaps and innovate and legislate a clear path that will both facilitate a quicker rebuild without compromising accountability. The business as usual approaches through fragmented ministries and standard bureaucracy has never been designed for post-disaster reconstruction at this scale. They cause delays in approval, duplication of efforts, slow procurement, and a weaker coordination. Precisely the problems that prolong suffering after major disaster. And everything that this NARA bill is trying to prevent. The establishment of NARA adds clear value by eliminating fragmentation through single point coordination, providing special powers of speed without sacrificing accountability, servicing a hub of technical competence to turn available international financing into bankable, high-quality, resilient projects. And finally, to enabling project networking to create new economies rather than simply restoring the old. Madam Speaker, the NARA bill is not attempting to reinvent the wheel. This is a proven model used successfully in other disaster recoveries globally. Existing structures would result in slower, less integrated, and less transformative outcomes. This is not about expanding government or complex legislation. Madam Speaker, quite frankly, this bill ought not to be a controversial one. This bill is a common sense bill. NARA is about smarter, faster, and more effective government when our people need it most, and it is an agile response to this crisis. I urge all members to support this bill so we can continue to deliver hope, resilience, and real recovery to every affected Jamaican, starting in Western Jamaica. The future of our nation depends on acting boldly and decisively today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from St. Mary Central. Are you, St. Mary Central, are you ready? Would you go ahead, please? Members who have indicated they will not be contributing today, the likelihood is that we will finish today, just for the record. For the record. Next member is the member from St. Catherine Southeast. That's not you, member. That's not you. Oh, you're acting.
I'm always on stage, yes. Madam Speaker, it was clear from the onset that we would not be closing the debate today.
Who indicated that, member?
The House Leader.
House Leader? Member,
Yes.
hold a moment. House Leader, please.
House Leader has
You did not
indicated
advise
that we
me.
would not be closing today. I also asked the Prime Minister himself, who indicated that he would not be closing today. And I know they weren't lying to me. So at 7 o'clock, our members who are going to be contributing, another 4 or 5 persons, perhaps even 6 persons,
That's okay.
would still like to contribute, and we would like the
Parliament
opportunity to do
continues.
so at the next sitting, since we are not closing today. Since we're not closing today, I'd like to be able to go and support it.
Thank you, thank you, Leader of Opposition Business.
Madam Speaker, I hear the Leader of Opposition Business. However, the better approach which we suggest is that all the members present in the House who want to contribute to the debate do so today. That would allow for a proper ventilation of any issues, suggestions, proposals they make, so that when we come next week, we are moving to close and to go to the committee. We don't want a situation that we come next week, members are raising new issues, and it won't further delay the bill. So I suggest to the members present in the House, a lot has already been said. And if the members take the approach to not repeat a point that has already been made, and say, if the members take the approach from henceforth to not repeat what has already been said, then we could be out of here by 7:30. So I ask the members who plan to contribute to contribute.
Members, I'm going to give you the list of persons who indicated that they were interested to speak. Westmoreland Eastern. I heard you already. Are you going to say something differently? Go ahead.
There is
Leader of
at
Opposition
least one
Business.
member who isn't here today who wants to contribute next week. Are we indicating that they will not be permitted to do so since we are not closing today?
Who is the member, Leader of Opposition Business? No, I'm asking the question. And if the member is, if the acting House Leader is indicating as much, then acting House Leader would know.
The member from Manchester who had to leave because he had an emergency has indicated
Member from Manchester,
that he would like an opportunity
please allow
to
acting. Could you say Manchester?
Yes.
Which seat exactly? Manchester South,
Yes,
Manchester
I
what?
hear you.
Northwest Manchester.
Wait, give me 5 minutes. Me almost finished with the document yet. All right.
He has great interest
All right. Thank
in
you.
this matter,
Thank you.
and he will have an emergency today. And I'm simply saying, if we're not closing today,
Thank you,
should be
Leader of
allowed to
Government,
contribute.
of Opposition Business. I'll get back to you in that regard. Next is the member from. So I'm going to still call the constituency name for everyone who indicated they would like to speak. So we have done St. Andrew North Central, St. Andrew Western, St. Mary Central is not ready, St. Anne Southeast, St. Catherine Southeast, Westmoreland Eastern, St. James, St. James West Central, St. James West Central, if you're ready, get up. I'm listing the persons. Some persons indicated they are not ready. So I'm just reiterating those who had asked. So are you ready? I am not making any commitment for next week. The House proceedings continue. Member from Westmoreland Eastern, are you ready? Yes, no? Member from St. James, member from St. James West Central.
Madam Speaker.
Member from St. James West Central, would you like the podium?
Madam Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to this bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Management and Implementation of the Post-Disaster Reconstruction and Resilience Efforts consequent on the passage of Hurricane Melissa, and for resilience generally, to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority and for connected matters. The bill, when passed into law, to be cited as the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Act, NARO. Madam Speaker, over the years that I have been in the Parliament, my starting point in presenting on bills is usually to look at the memorandum of objects and reason. And this bill seeks to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority and a statutory framework for the efficient, coordinated, and transparent management of extraordinary time-bound reconstruction and resilience efforts to focus on building back better to withstand future climatic and geophysical events. Secondly, to create a more robust, climate-resilient infrastructure, encouraging better land use planning. Thirdly, to expedite private and public-private investment in priority sectors that address the structural economic vulnerabilities exposed by Hurricane Melissa. And fourthly, to enable growth and diversification of Jamaica's economic base. Madam Speaker, my training and experience compels me to not only look at a bill in principle, but also in detail. Because when we pass laws, we're not passing laws for the statute book, we're passing laws to be used. And constitutionally, we're passing laws for the peace, order, and good government of Jamaica. And when the laws are to be used, we have to discover the meaning or effect of words used by the Parliament. And to do so, we cannot escape analysis, doesn't make an approach theoretical or theatrical. We really have to analyze, because the overriding aim must always be to give effect to the intention of Parliament as expressed in words used. And so the task of ascertaining the intention of Parliament, it demands an understanding that the intention of Parliament is an objective concept. It is not subjective. When we refer to the intention of Parliament, which is really to understand what it is that we're passing, this is to something that is objective and what we can reasonably impute to Parliament in respect of the language used. It is not the subjective intention of the minister or other persons who promote the legislation, nor is it the subjective intention of
You
the
just send
draftsman
part two to your email a while ago.
or of individual members,
Yeah?
or even a majority of
No,
individual
you know,
members of
me I do
either
that one a
house.
quick. You soon done
And
do.
so
You soon done, you soon done.
there
You kill me.
is
You
no
kill me a whole
escaping
week.
looking at what the words
This-
say.
Just one more part left. Alright.
Madam Speaker, this bill, as the Prime Minister has said, is the most consequential piece of legislation that is to be passed. And he invited all of us to approach the consideration of the bill seriously. And so, you know, we can't really rush it too much, even though time is of the essence. And I have a full appreciation of what the Prime Minister is seeking to achieve. I do not believe that anyone who has spoken has taken issue with the goals that are being pursued. But the concerns are whether the bill in its form will achieve those goals. Madam Speaker, the authority is to be constituted according, well, the clause 3 establishes the authority, and it tells us how it is to be constituted in accordance with the schedule. Now, some have taken issue with whether there is going to be a board or there isn't going to be a board, and the Prime Minister in his presentation indicated that we have other models in the jurisdiction where there is no board, and that is true. Under the Town and Country Planning Act, for example, there is provided for a planning authority, a Town and Country Planning Authority, and under that act, and this is an act of 1958, section 3(1) tells you that for the purposes of the act, the minister shall appoint a person or persons to be a town and country planning authority, and subject to the provisions of the act, and from time to time, by order, published in the Gazette, define the composition, powers, and duties of such authority. So it is true that what the bill is seeking to do by way of model already exists in the jurisdiction. So let us look at what will constitute the authority in the bill. The schedule speaks to a CEO and only a CEO. And so if the intention is to constitute the authority with a single office holder, then that is what will be achieved. But if that is not the intention, then the bill will require some rework. Now, the question naturally arises, in light of the objectives being pursued, whether a single person constituting the authority is the model that we should use. It is an appropriate question to be answered. But beyond that, essentially, the authority will also have the minister who is to step in. So, in essence, the authority, when it boils down to it, will be the CEO and the minister who steps in when the minister so steps in. Now, the issue has been raised about the concentration of power in many other pieces of legislation. Power is concentrated in the minister. The question is whether, in light of the objectives being pursued, this is a model that should be used. That is the live question. Now, the bill doesn't define which minister, a point that was made, but from all indications, it points to the Prime Minister, who has portfolio responsibility for the subject matter in this current dispensation. But it would require an indication of which minister, since numerous other ministers have been named. So that is the first point. What does the authority look like? And the bill right now presents the authority as the CEO. And when the minister steps in, the CEO and the minister. But the bill does not say what qualifies someone to be appointed as the CEO. Again, it is not unusual because other legislation allows for appointments as the minister thinks fit. But when you see what we're seeking to do, would it be helpful to get a profile of what the CEO will look like? Competency profile, what would qualify someone to hold the office of CEO, since if the bill were to proceed in this form, that person would equate to the authority. Moving from move to the functions of the authority. Clause 4 sets out the functions, and as has been said before, the functions are very wide. What jumps out at me as against the memorandum of objects and reason is that some of the functions may collide with each other, for want of a better expression. So that we know it is not good practice for anyone to provide oversight duties to self. And so clause 4, when you read all of it, you're going to see that, for example, the function of procuring goods, works, and services for the implementation of projects, programs, and plans, and then the function of establishing project management, compliance, monitoring, reporting, and risk management systems necessary for timely, efficient, and effective performance of procurement contracts for the implementation of approved projects, programs, and plans may run the authority into some trouble and may invite all kinds of genuine concerns.
House Leader, time now being 7:20.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the time now being 7:20, we ask that the House be allowed to sit. We are on 7:20.
Thank you. The question is that the time being 7:20 p.m., I put that the House be allowed to sit beyond 7:30 p.m. to complete the business of the day. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The business of the House continues. Member from St. James Central, turn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker. So what we find, based on how the bill is drafted, is that you can have self-oversight and you can have self-monitoring. Now, self-monitoring can take place, but I don't know that that is the kind of monitoring that you would want. It was my understanding that the authority would be monitoring other entities and someone else would be monitoring the authority without creating all of the duplications and all of the problems that we are so well aware of. Well, in the current form, the bill does not achieve that goal and would have to be reworked. The functions are also cast very wide. And, you know, the experience I've had tells me that when you can prevent some things ex ante or address them, you do so, so that you do not have to quarrel when you give power to someone and that power is exercised. And in this house, I have seen undignified quarrel breaking out about government exercising powers that are on the statute book, giving the impression as if something is wrong with that. Too many examples of it in this house. I do not subscribe to the school of thought which says that power granted shouldn't be exercised. I believe that if power is granted, it should be exercised. But I also subscribe to the school of thought which says it is not for a minister or an entity to determine the extent of the power that is granted under law. That the law itself must set it out and set it out clearly, so that we do not then start quarreling as to whether action taken was actually intended. So when we say that anything can be done, it literally means anything can be done. And we have to consider carefully if this is the power we want to grant. I think the major concern raised by presenters relate to the taking over of powers that are vested in other entities to achieve the goal of rebuilding and reconstruction. And the Prime Minister spoke to the fragmented way in which things are done and the absence of a coordinated approach on a single platform. And it's really unfortunate that we are there, because numerous efforts have been made to bring the entities under one umbrella. And the boards, in many pieces of our legislation, they are accountable to the ministers. And, you know, it remains work in progress. So we can quarrel about what should or shouldn't be done. The truth is that we are at a stage where we don't have the track record of power being exercised in a way to get things done quickly. We don't have the track record of the rest of government approaching issues with the kind of urgency that we, the members of parliament, would require. And so I appreciate the ask for the step in power. Many times when I'm in my constituency and I'm reasoning with constituents, I say to them, government is not a one-man show. that the office of Member of Parliament or the political directorate is but a small, though powerful part of government. And a lot of what you ask of me as Member of Parliament is assigned to somebody else in government. And when the power is assigned to someone else, I can't exercise that power because it becomes an ultra-virus exercise of power. Now, when you look on the legislation, the bill, the provisions are drafted very, very wide. Very wide. And I have no doubt that that is done to allow